Welcome, everyone. This is All Minus One, and my name is Bill. I apologize for those of you if you might have saw me set up the stream earlier for the 4 o'clock start. I wasn't sure when I'd be able to get to this. I started early because I do have to run to work, and this is the kind of the deal right now, guys. I just, I have to figure out how to balance my life and keep doing this with things outside of here, right? As always, and I will because it's what I do. I like keeping busy. What is it? Idle's hands or the devil's playthings, right? so, um, just a quick announcement before we get into the meat and potatoes of things. If you guys aren't aware, I am currently, right now, at this very moment, streaming it over on Rumble. I have it set up on Rumble. I will be streaming there every time I stream, just like I stream over on Entropy and on DLive. Now, with that, Rumble in the past was supposed to be uploading my videos. It wasn't working. Apparently, they've uploaded my last 2 streams. So if you go there, you'll see the last 2 streams I did, and then you'll see a stream from back in September. That was the stream I did with Aiden about everything having a cost, talking about the lockdowns and coronavirus, whatever else. YouTube yeeted it, literally, officially gave me a response back to my appeal back in September. My appeal in February. I think it was February 12th. I checked my email; it was there. So I'll bring it up sometime, but I don't into the show. I'll bring it into the show sometime. We'll talk about it some more, maybe. But absurd, absolutely absurd. It's been months. And in any case, so with that, I'm not always going to be streaming on YouTube, or if I do stream on YouTube, I might do like Salty Cracker does, and some other people, and switch off YouTube midstream, and I can do that through StreamYards here. So, or I should be able to do that. I'm more than certain I can. So that is a future possibility. If you guys want to support me over there, please go over there. Please sub to that channel over there. I will keep up with this. I will work on the Odysee at some point. But I had to figure this out. Couldn't quite figure it out last week in time. So here we are. In any case, the subject matter of the day is critical race theory in the Great Apostasy. And these things are hand in hand in my mind. They go together because the great apostasy, or the great falling away, as the Apostle Paul mentions in Second Thessalonians, began by men rejecting God outright. Now, there were always people who didn't believe. There were always atheists. There were always people who had their own forms of religion. There were always people who weren't necessarily Christians, even when the church dominated. And in fact, I don't see that the domination of the church was actually godly or biblical either. In fact, I believe it to be prophecy. But what has to come with that is the filling of the void, because we are religious creatures, folks. We are creatures that need meaning and purpose in our life, and we need a form of ritual to some degree, and we need to look at the bigger scope and picture of things. And this is where the theology of Marxism comes in as the seductive evil that it is, and how it has led so many astray. And it's funny, I remember someone, like it was a gotcha random thing. It was a random internet kind of conversation. Someone asked me, "What do you think about Marx's statement that opium's the religion of the masses?" Like, it's like, I think it's a nonsense, empty statement. Like, anything can be the religion, or the opium of the masses. Anything, like your sports ball, cake, and circuses, folks. It's a nonsense statement, because Marxism in itself is a religion. So this is a video that James Lindsay did on his new Discourses podcast. I'm going to read this introduction to you, and then we're going to look at some clips, and I'm going to do this for a while. Now, today, I only have an hour or so. But I mean, I'm going to come back to this. We're going to look at more clips. I'm going to try to paint a picture that is palatable, for most people. It's easy to digest. And James does actually a pretty good job of that, but I think that he makes good cogent points at certain in certain videos that could be extrapolated and placed together, right? So that's kind of what we are going to look at here. So it says, most people think Marxism is an economic theory or perhaps a social theory. This isn't sufficient. Marxism's, strange as it sounds, is a theology, the basis for a religion. This isn't to say that Marxism or communism is like a religion. Hey, real quick, a thought just came to my head before I go on. Let me guys know how the sound is. I watched back the Ends Justify the Memes from Wednesday, and the sound on YouTube was terrible. I don't know if that was my mic or a setting in StreamYard, so I prefer to have nice sound. I'm not a big tech guy, so I don't know all the things, but if I could do something to change that, please let me know. Shelly says sound is fine. Good. Okay. So, and I don't know if the Ends Justify the Memes sounded fine live, and it was just the YouTube playback that sounded bad. I have no idea. In any case, let's continue here. It is easy to say that it is, hold on, let's go back one sentence. This isn't to say that Marxism or communism is like a religion. It is to say that it literally is a religion. The basis for Marxian theology is work, or as they tend to have it, the work. You must do the work. The work is the basis of the Marxian theory, or Marxian theology, excuse me. In the same way that submission is the basis of Islam and atonement by grace through the sacrifice of Christ is the basis of Christianity. This is a groundbreaking episode of New Discourses podcast. James Lindsay dives into the Marxian literature, including the writings of Karl Marx himself, to show that Marx should be thought of as theology by clarifying how this theology works. Understanding the theological nature of Marxism will, in turn, shed considerable light on the theological nature of wokeness. So you can go to his website and watch that. Now, if you please, what I'm going to do is I have cut some videos of his down, just little clips from numerous videos that he has on the internet, but a lot of them he's been putting out recently. And, all of his stuff right there. If you want to learn about Hegel, go to that. Hegel's at the root of a lot of this, in any case, and his theory of basically creating a synthetic world. And one of the other videos, and I'll address them when we get there, is from this other YouTube channel, Sovereign Nations and Hyperreality, the Gaslighting. And we're going to look at a clip from that in the beginning. So with that, Anti-Commie says, best content. With that, let me go check over on Rumble and Entropy real quick. Who knows? Never know who's creeping in there. And then let me play some clips for you. This first one, I want you to understand, because many of you maybe come across the thumbnail I used, right? A direct quote from a member of government talking about basically what the Great Reset is back in 2016, mind you. So this all gets tied into it, and I will tie it back around by the end of the show today. So hopefully we'll be able to move pretty quick. I need to probably be done by about 4:45 so I can get myself ready and get on to work tonight. And hopefully tonight will be a good night for work. But let's get into this first video here. So this is a compilation video, but you'll get the gist of it real quick.
Generation like Prime Minister Trudeau, half of this government are actually young noble leaders of the world economic forum. We penetrate the cabinets.
The change is not just happening. The change can be shaped by us. We have to prepare for a more angry world. How to prepare? Take the necessary action to create a fairer world. I see the need for a great reset. So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen.
There is only one way this pandemic is going to go. It's going to get worse and worse and worse.
The next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
Now, we all know this. Now, he specifically says within this that it is our duty to shape, to take hold of these things and to break them and to bend them to their will, right? Now, I am obviously embellishing his words a little bit there. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but he literally does write about these things. He talks about it extensively. And we know what they're all about because of the things that they write. And they literally do believe that the world is going extinct, or are at least trying to use that as a means to motivate people into their line of thinking. Well, hello, Anti-Commie, with a big old donation over on Entropy, says, the pies were hot and fresh and delivered in 15 minutes. Top score. Be at peace, friends. The world is trying to bend you over. Truth must win. All right. Yeah, Shelley says, yeah, he hasn't exactly consulted us yet. They haven't seen our responses yet. Oh, they've seen the responses. I've brought it up before on the World Economic Forum's YouTube page. But let's get into the actual Marxist theory and some of the things that Lindsay has broken down. So I'm going to play a clip from Lindsay. He's going to talk about Marxism a little bit. Then I'm going to play a clip about how he got into it and understanding that he got into it as a young man. Now, he's a mathematician by trade. Before that, from my understanding, he was a massage therapist. That's how he worked his way through school, something like that. James is not he's not a dumb guy, but he's also not, he doesn't seem to come off as an elitist to me, right? He's actually concerned about this terrible trend that's going on in our society. This trend that, Temple the other week said was emergent. I don't think so. No, it's not emergent at all. If it's emergent through the means of Satan, sure. But these folks are literally pushing this from the top down, and it has infested every ounce of our cultural institutions. So let's play the clip.
In this podcast, I want to cut straight kind of to the chase.
Once again, guys, let me know if the sound is too high, too low. I'll see what I can do about it. If the video is really low, I'll turn myself down, but just let me know.
And give you some pictures from Marx, some ideas from Marx, and then show you that those are reproduced virtually identically in critical race theory. So maybe that's what the book should have been. I don't know, but the onion of critical race theory needed to be peeled at any rate. So just to kind of start off, one of the things that I mentioned, by the way, early on in race Marxism is that we should think of critical race theory as a belief system. And in fact, Marxism overall is kind of a religion that's rooted in kind of Hegelian dialectic, blah, 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 blah. Don't want to dive into that particularly deeply, but I want to point out, I did not know this when I wrote Race Marxism. I learned this fairly recently, that the first version of the Communist Manifesto was actually going to be titled, the first draft that Marx and Engels actually wrote was meant to be titled The Communist Confession of Faith. And they decided to change it to the Communist Manifesto because they thought that calling it a confession of faith when it's supposed to be a super anti-religious program was a little too on the nose, I guess, for what's really going on. And that is that communism is in fact, or Marxist communism is in fact a religion.
Right. And Marx was an atheist, and much like the new atheists, or there were predecessors before them, of course, but they are religiously atheist. See, there are people who don't believe. Most people, I would say, who don't believe are actually more agnostic, right? Which I find to be a smarter position. That's a position of, I just don't know. I'm not sure. But the atheists, a lot of them just don't care. They just don't believe in it, and it's not a big deal. Like when you meet your average person. But the new atheists, the atheists who are adamant, militant, and wanting to destroy any ounce of your faith, your belief system, and trying to challenge you and make fun of you, all that stuff. They're being religious, right? They are motivated by their belief, a belief that they can't prove, mind you. I actually believe I can prove that God's real, but that's another topic. um, and I believe that I can prove that through prophecy because that's how God says he proves himself. But regardless, we could say, oh, those things are wrong or, fairy tales, whatever. Um, the atheists don't understand that they then become motivated and centralized, and it's really not atheism itself, but scientism that becomes their religion. Well, this is no different for these Marxists, for neo-Marxists, postmodernists, all of these folks, or the critical race theorist. And I'll talk, or James will talk, and I'll elaborate on the ties there.
In a crackpot religion, you can go listen to the very long podcast I did here on New Discourses about the theology of Marxism. I wish I had realized this fact when I did that podcast, as a matter of fact, even though it's just a short thing to mention. But that, I think, it's not really relevant to the argument that I want to make here particularly, but it does underscore the argument that I make throughout race Marxism, which is that, in fact, critical race theory, being an extension of Marxism, is in fact a religious faith that's rooted in racism. And this explains things like the weird behavior of people like Robin DiAngelo, for example, who very clearly has realized that there's this race Marxist religion, that racism is bad, and that she's a racist, and she doesn't know how to deal with her nature as a sinner under this faith. And her writing, which is very strange and confessional in tone if you read it, and then very, she's projecting her confession onto everybody else and saying that everybody has white fragility and all white people are racist and all these kind of very strange things, then giving examples about how racist she actually is in her life. It's easy to understand what's going on when you realize.
So he brings up Robin DiAngelo. She was the hot topic critical race theorist a few years back in her book, White Fragility, and how she openly admits how she holds these views, and therefore everyone else must hold these views, I guess. I don't know. Now, what he goes into there, right, the last few things he said is that she goes on basically self-flatulating, basically being an apologist for all of her horrible sins and all of those kind of things, right? And this is similar to how people feel often when they first join a religion, right? Or even for a while, penance is a very important part of the Christian faith, and understanding where you stand, who you are, in perspective to God and his greatness and his glory. And so often you'll hear me talk about how I was a horrible person and my sins and my things, because I don't want other people to have to experience or go through that. I don't know if they'll listen. I don't expect anyone to listen, but perhaps they will use, what my experiences were as some sort of guide instead of having to go through those things themselves. Perhaps it might be useful to at least some people. And that's why I talk about those things. I don't think it's good to hide your wrongs. In fact, I think it causes more trouble than not. It's pretty much the central theory of the book I'm writing. Or central theme, I should say, or at least one of them. So, what we have here? Shelley says, "Save that wretch like me." Yeah, Amazing Grace. Yep, original sin. Yes, although the original sin concept was more. That came from Augustine, right? It's very prominent in Calvinism. Modern people absorb the Calvinistic Augustinian perspective of original sin. The early church knew better and knew that, well, Adam sinned. We live in a cursed, sinful world, but it doesn't mean that you can't be or act righteous even without the power of God. There's nothing in the scripture that says that you can't act as a good man. In fact, there are many scriptures that suggest otherwise. People take one line out of the Bible from the book of Romans that Paul was quoting for emphasis, saying, no man is righteous, no, not one. But we see all kinds of references to righteous men in the Bible. So let's understand that there is a grain of nuance there. And it's not that you are totally depraved as the Calvinist would teach. That's not it at all. It's that you're in a world that's full of sin. You're in a fallen state because God cannot connect with you because, you're stinky, basically. And he's holy and separate. And so therefore you have to be purified and cleansed. And the penalty for that was death, of course, and enslavement to sin and Satan. And Christ's sacrifice on the cross was like Aslan and Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe, right? Was a sacrifice to Satan, not to God. That's a Calvinist flipping of the understanding. And also, I think, heretical and evil. Makes God to be an evil character. No, Christ sacrificed himself to Satan because Satan had control of the earth. He is the king of this world. If you don't understand that, you need to read your scriptures plainly without any doctrine in mind.
That she's adopted this race Marxist faith. Her book could almost be the race Marxist confession of faith, and that she is dealing with the fact that she can't live up to the standards of her religion because she's actually got racist issues that she hasn't figured out how to resolve. Possibly because the critical race theory that she's adopted, in fact, gets in the way. Just if I had to guess. Critical race theory actually makes people more racist. It does not make people less racist.
And we know that. And, of course, the growing divide in the world right now between political factions and extremes continues. And it continues because of the pushing of things like this. And especially when you tell all people of a certain ethnic heritage that they are evil inherently, and that all the ills of the world are their fault, and that none of them existed before they ascended to power. And the entire power structure is based on their whims. Of course, there's no evidence of this. It's completely nonsensical. But this is a true blind faith. It's based on emotional appeals. So how did Lindsay get involved in this stuff before we go forward? Well, here's a lecture, the beginning of a lecture he gave the other year about how he kind of came across it. And then and the reason why I'm going to play this is because of the ridiculousness of what he was reading and how he came across it.
I want to start today by telling you how I got here. And to do that, I want to bring you into how I've been feeling for a while now. An analogy will help. So back in the 90s, I'm a child of the 90s. It's been long enough where it's cool to say that. There was something of a trope that got popular in big Hollywood movies. Hollywood really got into disaster films, big cataclysmic disasters, like a volcano, an asteroid, maybe some giant tidal wave. Everything was going to freeze. I don't know. Maybe it was a virus brought over from the jungle by a capuchin monkey. In every one of those movies, you had this one particular character, not the hero, Jeff Goldblum or something. He was always some kind of scientist, kind of a weirdo. And that person saw the problem kind of before everybody else and more or less freaked out. They tried to tell public officials, the public, anyone who would listen, something catastrophic is on the way.
Now, what he's describing here is how he feels. I'll let him finish here in a second, but it should be noted, this is an archetype. This is an archetype of a prophet. And, I don't think I have some special powers from God or anything, but I've likened myself to a prophet on occasion, not to be arrogant, but just to say that I'm espousing these things and you need to watch out and things are coming. And I understand that very few will listen. And Christ said specifically that a prophet won't be listened to in their hometown or by their family. People don't like those who point out the truth. We know that all of the biblical prophets were basically killed by their own people, but we can get away from that, since some people think that's all fairy tale, even though a lot of it's the accounting of the history of a people. But we can go to someone else like Plato, who we really have very little actually writings of, like original or old writings, manuscripts. But everyone accepts that he was a real figure, that he was real. And, he talked about Socrates and how he died. And what was Socrates? Well, Socrates was a prophet. He was a prophet saying that the way that things were happening at the time was not good, and it was bad for the whole of society, and yada, yada, yada. And they said, well, Socrates is corrupting the youth, and they executed him. Socrates willingly killed himself, but that to them was the more honorable way to go, right? Instead of having to be hauled off to be executed. So keep that in mind.
So 20-something years later, out of the 90s, that's me. I'm not Jeff Goldblum. He got eaten by a dinosaur on a toilet.
That's a good joke, but that's not what happened. That was Newman. He did not get eaten by a dinosaur on the toilet. Or if that wasn't Newman, that wasn't him, right? That was somebody else. It was the other guy that ran. I haven't seen Jurassic Park in forever. So, but either way.
I think I'm Dustin Hoffman, and this is like a virus outbreak. A huge cultural shift is taking place right under our noses, and this could end badly for a lot of people. And it comes in a pretty box: social justice. So I want you to come away today seeing what's inside that box, and to see that it doesn't match what's on the picture on the outside. My worried scientist moment hit just over 2 years ago. For a few years up to that point, I had been noticing a lot of prominent public intellectuals, thinkers I respected, getting accused of things like sexism and racism for reasons that didn't stack up. Reasonable folks like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, Sir Tim Hunt, the ESA scientist Matt Taylor, who landed humanity's first spaceship on a comet and had made the mistake of wearing a bowling shirt with attractive cartoon women on it and was pilloried for that. Being that I have two cognitive allergies, one to bullshit and the other to unfairness, I couldn't leave this alone, and I engaged it frequently on the internet, which is, of course,
I have the same cognitive allergies. I hate BS and I hate bullies. So I feel you.
it's the best place to engage anything. So every time I engaged, if I found somebody who would discuss it with me, I was told that racism and sexism are systems. And I'd get referred to technical definitions that appeared in the academic literature and what I assumed at the time was sociology. This eventually got me looking into gender studies. And at first I came away thinking, okay, there's racism, there's sexism, and then there's this other idea, systemic racism or systemic sexism. They're two different things. And I was really frustrated that the people who kept calling these folks I respected racist and sexist wouldn't take pains to distinguish between them. They just said racism, they just said sexism. To me, loosely associating someone with a vague system of racism or sexism isn't nearly the same thing as them actually being racist or sexist. As these accusations kept piling up, I got more and more curious about them. Eventually, I gave in. I resisted it for a really long time, actually, and I decided to carefully read one specific paper that kept coming across my path 2.5 years ago today. It was about something called feminist glaciology. What on earth is feminist glaciology, you might wonder, because I did. So as they say in the paper, quote, feminist theories and critical epistemologies, especially feminist political ecology and feminist post-colonial studies, open up new perspectives and analyses of the history of glaciological knowledge. So I know that's a lot of jargon, but I want to hone in on one particular word, kind of like Dr. Bogosian did this morning. Critical is the word I want to talk about today. That paper was my first full-on direct exposure to critical methods. That's what I want to speak some truth to today. My first hands-on experience with critical theory was not a good one, as my family and colleagues here can tell you. As it happens,
Now, for me, CRT is kind of newer. I've been very aware of postmodernism for a long time. Derrida, Foucault, all of them. Oddly enough, one of the clips I have, Lindsay points to a postmodernist who actually is not obscene, but he, the problem is the postmodernists are used as roadmaps instead of being seen as a philosophical perspective that's questioning where the world's going and why it's going that way and yada, yada, yada. The left, the extremists use these ideologies as, or these philosophies as roadmaps to destruction, and often to some degree counterproductive or counter to what the postmodernists intended in the first place. But we'll get to. Well, I think I have a clip in here where he gets into, getting into the reduction of language or objects or whatever. This is what Derrida did, and it's just not. It's absurd, basically, because as like say Jordan Peterson would argue all the time, like once you have infinite categories, you have no category, right? And so we have to observe the world through a limited, finite amount of perspectives. If we don't, then, and this, it's because of utility that we have to. If we don't, then we can't operate. And that's part of the problem that's going on in society right now. People have these perspectives that have no grounding or meaning in them. So then people are then having a issue sussing out who their personality is, who their identities are, and grasping onto what is true and real. And then, of course, most of them will say, well, there is nothing true. There is nothing real. Punch them in the face, see if they think that that's real or not. But I'm just saying, don't punch anyone in the face, please. I'm just saying, like, this is absolutely absurd. We cannot go on and say that there are no categories, nothing is truly real. It's all subjective. It's all social construct. And then at the same time, these people will tell you that racism and white supremacy is the whole entire system and the reason why everything's wrong. So everything's subjective except for that, right? But let's hear about this. Let's hear about this feminist glacier studies, because it's pretty absurd.
Recorded that experience in the notes I took as I went through that paper in detail. And they began simply enough with entries such as, glaciers are key to climate change. Yeah, okay. Ice should be seen as a part of society, as historical, seen through a cultural framing of glaciers. Glaciers have huge social impact. I have notes that go on to say, this paper is full of weird stuff, like a need to explore the relationship between gender and glaciers. This paper is very concerned about power, I wrote. Like, quote, there is even less from a feminist perspective that focuses on gender, understood here not as a male-female binary, but as a range of personal and social possibilities, and also on power, justice, inequality, and knowledge production in the context of ice, glacier change, and glaciology, end quote. So glacier science doesn't focus enough on power. I wrote, the goal of the paper is to critically uncover the under-examined history of glaciological knowledge and glacier-related sciences. At this point, I was already thinking something might be wrong here. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I wanted to get through the paper. Things kept going downhill. My notes got a little more colorful. A little further down, I wrote, "The paper seems to call for people to write stories and make films about the ways their lives interact with the glaciers, rather than just studying them scientifically, and to consider these art projects within the scope of scientific glaciology. This is insane." There were other admonstrations to include art projects as though they are science. Quote, "Scottish visual artist Katie Patterson chronicled the ordinary sounds of 3 glaciers in Iceland, and then transferred the audio tracks to LP microgroove vinyl ice records. Records created by casting and freezing the glacier's own meltwater. She then played the frozen records simultaneously on 3 turntables as they melted. The audio recordings, available at www.katiepatterson.org/ice records, fuse glacier sounds with the high whine of the ice record itself. After 10 minutes, the actual ice LP record deteriorates and the sound melts away." Next to that quote, I wrote, "No shit, it really says that like it's science." I had a background in physics. I was having a hard time with this paper. By the end, I had notes that were a little simpler, like, "Holy hell, I can't believe they put examples like this." The very last note I wrote reads, "I can't do this anymore." Well, it turns out I was wrong. I could still do it. Not only did I finish that paper, as of this 2 years later or so, I've done almost nothing else but read critical theory. It's been great for my mental well-being and happiness, I assure you. And now I finally understand what's going on. Spoiler alert. The infected monkey is loose in the city, and just like in the movie, people don't believe the threat is real.
Yep. And so I played that so you understand this, that I think James, like myself, finds this logical contradiction, finds this thing that's absolutely absurd and ridiculous. And he happened to know the right people. The big reason why James Lindsay came about was because of his association with Peter Boghossian, as well as Heather Pluckrose, or is it Helen Pluckrose? I always want to mess up her name, so forgive me on that. But Helen Pluckrose and, of course, Jonathan Haidt. So Jonathan Haidt, a psychologist who works on moral psychology, had some connection with Lindsay early on when he came up. And this is all that James does. So now kind of sort of into the meat and potatoes. And guys, I'm going to try and get this all in, but what I have prepared for today. But this isn't going to be the last stream. I'm going to clip more, do whatever. I only had time to prepare this today. Next week, I will have more time to get more specific clips and even potentially edit some videos together to just make it more streamlined.
And now we're going to talk about the 150 or so years of muscle behind it.
So as a preface, this is a recent talk that he had. Now, James has just released a new book. And with that, he's been giving or releasing these lectures he did, 2-3 weeks ago, at a seminar over the course of several days. And with that, he basically is breaking down his book and where these theories come from. And as he would say, peeling the layers of the onion back of critical race theory. And so he's going to talk about Marx's beliefs. I'm going to address some of those things. I've addressed Marx's beliefs before. I have another clip that he talks about where this goes. And I have a clip from the Lotus Eaters as well about the World Economic Forum and of course, something that the World Economic Forum put out. And I tied this all together, like I said, because this is what they're teaching as well. And when you have every world leader saying the Great Reset, build back better, we need to do this, you have to understand there is nothing emergent about this. This is 100% from the top down, and they are 100% conspiring to control your mind.
And so we're going to talk about the deep ideological origins of critical race theory. And of course,
now that you're done being Stream Daddy, before we let that play, Anti-Commie did send another donation over on Entropy. He says, Christ is the light and the truth, and we have been bathed in his blood for our sins. There you go. All right, I'll hit play now.
that means, since we just talked about neo-Marxism, which is obviously derived from Marxism, and we just talked about postmodernism, which I said was post-Marxist, and we see the threads of neo-Marxism and Marxism all throughout critical legal studies, liberationism, etc. Obviously, we are dealing with something Marxian. And of course, at the lecture last night, I believe we covered that this was unequivocally the case, that Marx is behind all of this intellectually. So we'll begin with Marx. To kind of frame that, though, let me read interesting quote that I mentioned in the first lecture from Richard Delgado on the founding conference of critical race theory. So this occurred in Madison, Wisconsin in 1989. He said, this was in an interview he did, I think in the late 90s. So before critical race theory and introduction came out. I believe in the interview, if I recall correctly, I'd have to check, he indicates that it would be great to write a high school level book, which came out in critical race theory and introduction. I was a member, he said, of the founding conference. 24 of us gathered in Madison, Wisconsin to see what we had in common and whether we could plan a joint action in the future, whether we had a scholarly agenda we could share, and perhaps a name for the organization. Kimberly Crenshaw provided that in critical race theory. I had taught at the University of Wisconsin, and Kim Crenshaw later joined the faculty as well. The school seemed a logical site for it because of the Institute for Legal Studies that David Trebek was running at the time and because of the Hasty Fellowship Program. The school was a center of left academic legal thought. So we gathered at that convent. They did not actually have it at the school, they had it at a convent.
So forgive me, I must have misremembered how I ordered these. So again, he's talking about critical race theorists here, and you'll see how they admit that they're Marxist. Then we'll talk about what Marx believed was going to happen with the world. That's the order.
Near the school in Madison for 2.5 days around a table in an austere room with stained glass windows and crucifixes here and there, an odd place for a bunch of Marxists, and worked out a set of principles. We then went our separate ways. Most of us who were there have gone on to become prominent critical race theorists, including Kim Crenshaw, Mary Matsuda, Charles Lawrence. Derek Bell, who was doing critical race theory long before it had a name, was at the Madison workshop and has been something of an intellectual godfather of the movement, so we were off and running.
So Derek Bell is essentially the origin of this iteration of neo-Marxism. But regardless, it's just neo-Marxism and Marxism in the end. And the primary difference between Marxism and neo-Marxism is the neo-Marxists basically understood that the bourgeois had anesthetized the masses with their luxurious lifestyles and living, that the middle class lifestyle is really not that bad. And capitalism actually provided a pretty good life. But these people, they need to be shaken out of their dream, their sleep. They need to be woken up to the realities that they're enslaved. Okay. You know who the only class of people in the world in all of history who couldn't own property were? They were slaves, folks. They weren't, people weren't in the middle class as slaves. Now, maybe you could be a wage slave, as they like to say. This is all tied into their theory, but that's silly. Because you have to work. It is part of life. And so Marxism at its core rejects nature. It rejects the fundamental nature of humanity and the world that we live in. And it inherently creates a materialistic outlook. Because once your neighbor has more than you, then you must assume that he coveted that, he is evil, and you get to have a part of it. You get to be a victor in his spoils, right? Completely materialistic. It is a dark philosophy. Marx was a dark individual with a dark mind. And now I generally, character assassination is not something I want to try and do, but when someone is so despicable like Karl Marx was, and you go read about his personal life, he was absolutely a horrendous person. Like, when someone is so despicable, their intellectual ideas, I don't care what they are. They're not really worthy of respect. And we could say, oh, he's a complicated character. I would say that about Thomas Jefferson and some of the contradictions in his life. Thomas Jefferson was a complicated character, right? Karl Marx was just an evil man.
Odd place for a bunch of Marxists. So we can't ignore, just like we can't ignore the threads to neo-Marxism, I don't think we can ignore the thread to Marxism. So we have to understand what Marxism is. Marx had a peculiar view of history, a historicist view of history, that history progresses along a particular trajectory, and he looked.
All right, so a historicist view of history. I have to address this because I take a historicist view of history. All Christians should take a historicist view of history. A historicist view means that you believe that history is unfolding under a certain perspective. If you are a Christian, or Spook, I know you're a Muslim, you would have a similar perspective of history, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, Islam teaches that there is a end of the world, right? So if you don't have that, then you can think of history as cycles or whatever, just continuing on forever. But this I'm bringing up because it is part of the fundamental religion of Marxism, right? The historicist perspective. Now we can get into, as far as on the Christian side of things, there are historicism is usually used for people's perspective of prophecy, specifically end time prophecy, as it's known, the Book of Revelation. And so, a historicist takes the perspective that the Book of Revelation, the things that happen in the Revelations or that are talked about, don't all happen in this little tiny period at the end of time. That they unfold over a period of time until Christ returns, and that there might be a little tiny period at the end of time. It depends on who you talk to, right? But there might be a little time, a period where it is the worst of worst, but all of it is unfolding over time. I don't think that Christ decided to give us a love letter and to John, to St. John the Apostle, and then all of a sudden, not have us hear anything for 2,000 years. No. He told us what would occur over the next several thousand years. And it really does. And when you have that perspective, a lot of things make sense. Spook says, yep, we have end times just like you. Yep. And I don't know again, I'm not as well versed in Islam, of course, because it's not my faith. But what I understand, you guys have a sort of Messiah yourself coming, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe you wouldn't use that word as a Jewish word, but some sort of savior.
At the economic and material conditions as characterizing what history is, and he believed that history progressed through 6 stages anywhere in the world that history was happening. And it progressed dialectically, according to what he called dialectical materialism. And those 6 stages began in primitive communism, tribal, small group, everybody's family, everybody shares, then progresses into a slave system where.
So I've talked about this. This is most economists. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time speaking today, but it does happen to me. Most economists are of that understanding, right? Most anthropologists, we were all tribal. I mean, it's pretty simple. We still live in tribal units. They're called families, right? Some of us, depending on the nation we live in, still live in extended families, extended tribal units. Most of us don't live in the ancient tribal style where you still live with your cousins and all that kind of stuff as well. So that's just it's just a reality. But then here is where Marxist theory immediately goes in. Oh, well, then all of a sudden there's exploitation and slavery.
Some people figure out domination and exploitation and take it to its extreme and enslave others to do their labor.
again, this is a biblical perspective to some degree. The first king mentioned in the Bible, not officially as a king, but is recognized through tradition as the first king, was Nimrod. And Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And that's about all it says. Most, or I should say most, a lot of people who study the occult and these things from the past believe that Nimrod was the first Babylonian king in ancient Babylon that built the Tower of Babel, right? So again, similar perspectives. And I want you to keep in mind that that Marxism and wokeism and critical race theory and all these things are just religious belief.
And from there, it evolves out. He's looking, of course, back at the French state before the revolution, to a feudal estate economy. Feudal lords run estates, serfs who are not quite slaves but are basically still slaves do all the labor and generate this new economy. This eventually gives way to the idea of private property. Private property gives rise to the idea of trade of private property, and this gives rise to capitalism. Now your estate becomes capital, and you can trade your capital as you will. Capitalism is filled with dialectical contradictions that will eventually become intolerable to Marx. The working class will slowly awaken to a class consciousness, at which point they will become a proletariat, which is an awakened working class to the exploitation that they're suffering, that their labor is being extracted from them to produce surplus value that the capitalists and the bourgeoisie steal from them and collect for themselves. And those contradictions will eventually awaken the working class to revolution. The proletariat will revolt. We'll have a proletarian revolution that will usher in a fifth stage of history, a managed state economy called socialism, where the working class will form a new state. They will proceed through a revolution. The revolution will seize the means of material production in society, and they will manage the state. But since they have an awakened consciousness to exploitation and alienation, they won't repeat the mistakes of the past, and eventually the contradictions that are now being worked out only by the enlightened, only by the Gnostic, who know the trajectory of history and they know the realities, the lived realities of exploitation and oppression.
By the way, when I talk about this as them being Gnostics, I did not get that from James Lindsay. Now, I will go back here, or we will look at a video a little bit where he talks about the synthetic world, and I thought that was a really, really powerful idea because it's true. And I've been talking to people about social engineering and all this stuff for years, long before I started on YouTube. But that's what it is. It's the synthetic world. So I'm going to back this up a little bit just so he can repeat these last few things. I'm going to make a couple comments about it real quick.
To a class consciousness, at which point they will become a proletariat, which is an awakened working class to the exploitation that they're...
So this never happened, right? And this is where Leninism and Stalinism came in, because they realized the working class would not awaken. And this is where neo-marxism came in, because Marx was wrong.
Suffering, that their labor is being extracted from them to produce surplus value that the capitalists and the bourgeoisie steal from them and collect for themselves. And those contradictions will eventually awaken the working class to revolution. The proletariat will revolt. We'll have a proletarian revolution that will usher in a fifth stage of history, a managed state economy called socialism, where the working class will form a new state. They will proceed through a revolution. The revolution will seize the means of material production in society, and they will manage the state. But since they have an awakened consciousness to exploitation and alienation, they won't repeat the mistakes of the past, and eventually the contradictions that are now being worked out only by the enlightened, only by the Gnostic, who know the trajectory of history and they know the realities, the lived realities of exploitation.
Ignatius, I'd love to talk about Gnostics. I think I will do that if I get into some of the early church fathers specifically, because I thought about reading some of them, including Justin Martyr's First Apology. It's a relatively quick read, although I don't know if he talks about them so much off the top of my head. But there are other people like Irenaeus and Hippolytus that focus on them. A lot of the early church fathers, you read them, they go through a whole retelling. It's a quick summation, but a whole retelling of philosophies that came through the world. Irenaeus is very specifically addressing Gnostics and what they were teaching, and the summation of what I generally would tell people is Gnostic means that you know through special means and special knowledge, and that by that special means and special knowledge you are saved. And so Christ said that I teach nothing in secret. And there was, of course, people going around in the day saying, no, 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 there were secret teachings. And most of them were, just manipulating people so they could go, bang like, 20 women at a time and stuff like that. That's what a lot of it was about. But, in any case, they perverted what Christianity was. They talked, maybe I'll go through Irenaeus sometime. And I'd have to probably cut it down though, because he is very verbose and repeats himself. He's kind of like me. In any case, let me hit play here.
And oppression will work out the contradictions in the right way, and eventually the state, which is run by the dictatorship of the proletariat, will realize its redundancy, and it will start to dissolve itself, and eventually will completely dissolve itself into a classless, stateless, utopian society.
So somehow, and this is always my best criticism, somehow these people are so morally superior to all people who have ever lived throughout time that once they gain their totalitarian government, right, and they establish all these things, they'll just give up and dissolve it. They'll just give up all their power, because we know that's what actually happens in real life with human beings once they have power, right? Stin says, why would you want 20 headaches at the same time? I don't know, man. I'm a better man for marrying and whatever else, but I like my women, so I don't know. Don't get me wrong, you're right. I mean, back when I used to date a lot, it was also a pain to do all that. So Spook said the Gnostic philosophy is kind of cool, but the theology feels very pagan. Well, it wouldn't matter to you, but their theology very specifically makes the God the creator of the universe. Or maybe it would matter to you, Spook, because I guess Allah is that for you. But they essentially say that he doesn't know anything about this world. He's completely separated. And then the gods that made man, Jehovah was the one who made man, was a cruel, evil god, and all this other stuff. The occultists pick up on all this. It's very much tied into the mystery of religions back from the Babylonian age,
called communism.
All right, so there's that. I got a few more. I don't know if I'll be able to get to all of it today, but hey, that's how it goes. So let's see. I'll bring these other ones in, I guess, another day. Because I am just going to have to get out of here, guys. It's unfortunate, but I have a full-time job now, so I won't be streaming this Sunday, by the way, for you all to be aware. But I will try and stream on Tuesdays and Fridays before I go into work. And I'll probably pick up the siesta stream when I can. But I might end up working Sundays again, because right now I have a goal. I have a goal where I'm trying to make money for specific goals and specific things, so that my wife and I can, get out in the middle of nowhere and start homesteading like we would like to. So that's really what I'm doing. So, and I don't mind working, 50, 60 hours a week at all. Although I do need more time. I need to start working out again. I'm doing like pull-ups and dips here and there. All right. So, real quick though, what I will bring up to bring this back around before I get out of here is this video from the World Economic Forum. This was a few weeks old, but they're very much about this, and we will pick this back up, guys. It's like I said, it just is a matter of time limits for me right now, but I'll try and like I said, stream on Tuesdays and Fridays around 3:30, 4 o'clock at the latest. I like being consistent for you all, but keep an eye out. And because I can't always, things happen. I got a baby. I got a 17-year-old too. So, handful over here. But I think this is a good basis of the groundwork. We'll get more into the weeds, into the depths of things. I'm going to clip stuff throughout the week and get it together. And again, this is just to make it simple. Obviously, you can go read Marx, right? You can go read this little tiny book that doesn't really make any. I don't know. It's never been interesting to me. It doesn't make any good points. Mind you, I have never gone through Das Kapital. I'm not about to. I mean, I'm pretty sure Engels wrote that anyways. But let's play this last little video real quick. Because they commit 5 times more the crime, right? It's not because they're black, it's because of their culture. And their culture is, survival. Or at least the inner city ghetto, but, it's a whole thing we get into some other time. Okay, and we all know this. This is about praxis. 14 U.S. states have banned CRT from their classroom. Yeah, it's not taught at the graduate level. It is meant to be put into praxis. Praxis is a word that literally means practical application. And I showed you the statement from Lindsay from his new Discourses page about Marxism as a religion for the one video, and he is saying there that they have to do the work, right? There is a thing that they must achieve, that they must do. So actually, I will play another video. Get something in your head if you weren't aware of it. What do I think about CRT? I think it's a bunch of trash. Anyways, let's go to this video real quick.
Marx viewed history. He laid this idea out in 1848. We already read a piece from the Communist Manifesto in the first lecture where he points out that communism can be summarized to what he calls a sentence that isn't abolition of private property. This is Marx's view of history. This is Marx's view of how the world works. This is his historicism. History is progressing whether we want it to or not along this arc. And that the people who take up the cause, the people who become conscious and move it along, are the people who are making history do what it does. And the people who have that consciousness and take up the cause will be designated as on the right side of history, and those who resist and try to maintain the status quo of an earlier frame are on the wrong side of history.
Well, did you catch that? How many times have you heard a politician say that you're on the wrong side of history? If you hear that, whether they acknowledge it or not, you're listening to a Marxist. Now, most people don't understand that they're Marxist, and because they're not aware of their beliefs. They're not aware of these things being ingrained, subversively, supplanted subconsciously into their minds. So, yeah, think about that. Think about how many times you hear politicians say, "You're on the wrong side of history." I'm pretty sure Barack Obama used that phraseology quite a bit. But I'm going to leave it there, guys, because I do have to run. I appreciate it quite a bit that you all showed up. Eventually I will get on a very regular schedule here, but I got to figure out my work schedule completely. you know, um, but goals, right? We all have goals. Just as a reminder, I did start streaming on Rumble today. I am streaming over there right now. Those of you who are watching now, or if you're watching later, please go sub to the channel on Rumble. It is linked in the description. If you want to see when I took my little vacation a while back from YouTube, the 6 weeks I was off, the video that started that off, that was way back when. It is on Rumble. It's toward the top of the list. It's everything has a cost. It's me and Aiden Paladin just talking about, statistics of like people committing suicide, car accidents, this and that, and how we're worried about the coof. YouTube found that inappropriate. I don't know. One of us said something. I don't know. But they decided not to check out my, look at my appeal for 4 months until just 2 weeks ago. So that was interesting. In any case, guys, I'm going to get out of here. Appreciate you all for watching. No stream Sunday, but I should try. I will really try to stream Tuesday and next Friday here. And of course, you can count on us being there at the Ends Justify the Memes on Wednesday at 7 p.m. So thanks, guys, for watching once again. This has been All Minus One. My name is Bill, and I wish you all well.